Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Today, the Prime Minister finally set out his demands for European reform in a letter to the European Commission. One above all others is likely to prove controversial and difficult.
So we've proposed that people coming to Britain from the EU must live here and contribute for 4 years before they qualify for in-work benefits or social housing, and that we should end the practice of sending child benefit overseas.
The UK has renegotiated its arrangements with Europe before, in the 1970s, and again in the 1980s under Margaret Thatcher, who secured a much heralded rebate that today is worth billions of pounds annually. Times change. This building is no longer Conservative HQ. Ironically enough, it's now Europe House. And this renegotiation isn't about the money. Yes, the Prime Minister says this change will save £500 million a year, a number disputed by others. But this isn't about the saving. It's about making the UK a less attractive place for people to move from Europe to work in. Fundamentally, this is about immigration. For much of the public, immigration is the key issue. But the Prime Minister, faced with opposition in the EU, has retreated away from any fundamental change in the nature of free movement. Blunt instruments like quotas and caps on numbers are out, and the approach now is to restrict benefits. But that means discriminating against EU citizens in the welfare state, and it will be tricky to get other leaders to agree to that.
I think certainly this is the toughest part of his negotiation proposals. I think it will be tough to reach an agreement, but it's also clear this is the one area where he really needs to get something, since immigration is such a hot topic in this country. I think there will be some opposition from Eastern European states, particularly Poland, but if you look at the bigger picture trade-offs, are they willing to let the UK leave or risk the UK leaving the EU on this one issue?
If a deal on restricting benefits can't be found at the EU level, there's another option. Restrict access to in-work benefits for everyone, British or European. There's no discrimination there. Stop anyone getting anything out until they've paid in. But reforming the entire British social security system seems a radical step to bring down immigration.
Well, it is a bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut. It would be a hugely complex undertaking to re-engineer the already troubled universal credit system so that it was a contributory system, and seems a rather disproportionate response to what is, after all, a fairly small problem.
Even if a deal can be done with Europe, allowing the UK to discriminate against recent EU migrants when it comes to benefits, or if we overhaul our own welfare system, making it more contributory, there's reason to believe that might not actually bring down immigration from Europe. One of the centrepieces of George Osborne's economic policy is the new national living wage. As the Leave campaign are very keen to point out, that new national living wage will mean that even with benefit changes, many EU migrants would still be better off in 2020. This proposal is unlikely to bring down immigration, or be enough to satisfy those who want a more fundamental change in our relationship with the EU.
Said today he'd like to reduce EU migration by restricting benefits for 4 years to those coming in. Do you think that can be achieved?
It's a tough ask for the Europeans. I know the European Commission today has made the obvious point that under current European law that would not be legal. We know that. That's why we've said very clearly that there will need to be treaty change to accommodate our demands. But yes, we believe that there is a growing concern across Europe about abuse of welfare benefits, about the way welfare benefits are themselves distorting the labour markets
One of the ways,
in European countries.
As you well know, to stop this being a discriminatory measure is if British resident citizens were to go through that same process. Is that something that you're now considering?
Well, we have a benefit system which is designed primarily to deliver our objectives domestically, and this part of our benefit system is specifically designed to create incentives for people on low wages to be in work.
So that wouldn't
rather than
change
benefits.
in order
So
to bring down net migration?
We don't want to do anything that would undermine the principal purposes of our domestic benefit system.
So how are you going to bring down net migration, which is at the root of this, if, as you know, the practice won't be okayed by other EU member states, and you're not going to narrow out that?
Well, we don't, with respect, we don't know that. We know what the Commission has said. We absolutely agree with the Commission that under current EU law, introducing a 4-year waiting time for access to in-work benefits would not be legal. We know that. We're asking the European Union to change the law to allow us to do this. And we know we're not the only country in the EU that believes there needs to be action taken on access to benefits.
Nigel Farage pointed to the living wage and says when it's 10 times that of Romania, that's an incentive in its own right. The benefits is just tinkering around the edges.
No, the benefits is a serious contribution. I mean, the average migrant claiming in-work benefits is claiming around £6,000 per family.
So if you got this through,
that's a significant addition to wages.
So if this measure got through, you think you would dramatically reduce net migration figures?
Yeah, because we would change the calculus. People who are travelling across Europe, people who've got the get up and go to leave a country in Eastern Europe and come and find a job in the UK, have certainly got the savvy to be able to understand whether they would be better off in net terms in Germany or in Sweden rather than the UK. And if we take £6,000 a year out of their pockets, they will make different calculations about where they want to go to seek work.
But it sounds like from what you said, from what David Cameron suggested, and from what David Lidington said as well, it's about reducing incentives, but it doesn't have to be tied to the benefits or the welfare system. There are other ways now that are on the table?
Well, we've proposed, so we've set out our concern. Our concern is that there's an excess of EU low-skilled migration into the UK. We've set out a proposal that we think will tackle that by limiting access to welfare benefits. But that's not the only way you could tackle it. There are other ways you could tackle it. And if somebody's got a better suggestion, well, quantitative controls on inward migration would be one way. We believe that would be a more difficult thing for our European partners to accept than limits on access to benefits. But if our European partners come back to us with other ways of reducing migratory flows into the UK, of course we'll talk to them, because that is what we're trying to achieve. That's the objective of the exercise.
If they just say no to that?
Well, as the Prime Minister has said, more broadly on the whole package, if they turn a deaf ear to what are perfectly reasonable demands of the British people, then we'll have to sit down and think again about how we want to go forward with Britain's relationship with the European Union. We don't expect that will happen. We expect that we will get a fair hearing, that our partners in Europe will want to find a way of delivering a package that meets our legitimate concerns and enables us to go to the British people and say to them, this package represents a reform of the European Union, which will then allow us to be in an EU that works for Britain, that is to Britain's advantage, and that will make Britain stronger in the future.
Philip Hammond, the Foreign Secretary, talking to Emily, and some bits of super stereo sound in there too. Now, here to dissect that and the political day, Danny Finkelstein, Conservative peer and Times columnist, The Guardian's Zoe Williams, and the writer and journalist Melanie Phillips. Look, the renegotiation plan is on the table. Melanie, you were around when Harold Wilson pulled off this trick in the 1970s. Is this a repeat of that? Because people look back and say he didn't really renegotiate, he just had a fig leaf.
I think it is a repeat. I mean, I voted no then because I thought we were being sold a pup. And I think we're being sold a pup now. A lot of noise and fury here, signifying very little. I mean, you know, getting rid of the words ever closer union doesn't alter the fact that union is becoming ever closer in the EU. Stating that we have our own currency, a bit of a statement of the obvious, seems to be beyond risible. And this great benefits row, I mean, you know, correlation is not causation. Hello. The fact that all these EU migrants here are claiming in-work benefits doesn't mean that's what draws them here. What's drawing them here is the availability of jobs, a different problem altogether. This is selling us a pup. We were promised by Mr. Cameron in another era now, a renegotiation, a treaty renegotiation which would redefine our relationship with Europe. We would repatriate various laws, give ourselves back self-government in exchange for what I think very many people want, which is a close and harmonious economic union, no more, no less.
Danny.
Well, I think it's somewhere between a massive renegotiation of the type that I think David Cameron believed was possible at a time when he thought this would coincide with the Eurozone obviously needing to renegotiate its own new treaties, and that hasn't happened. So Britain is really having its own negotiation at a different time, but it's also much more than Wilson's. It does involve some fundamental aspects of our relationship. You can see that it'll be quite difficult to negotiate the benefit part. The question of whether the single market will be insulated from the consequences of the Eurozone integration, that's raised by the first section of Mr Cameron's letter. For me personally, I think the ever closer union language was very important, and I think it is important to learn whether we're able to negotiate to remove that. It would be a big signal to me, as someone who's been very sceptical about the European Union, if it was not possible to negotiate that. So I'll learn quite a lot from that. And the process of this partly is to learn what is the European Union's attitude to Britain making some moderate, middle-size changes, and I think there will then be more changes when the Eurozone further changes itself.
Zoe, you're pro-EU, by and large, I think, yeah?
I'm pro-Europe. I'm actually not pro the EU, as it is at the moment.
Right. So, but just where... Do you see this as a fundamental renegotiation?
Oh, no.
OK.
I mean, look, the idea that the benefits was a kind of make or break issue. I think they think they've laid a trap for the EU. They think they've said something really, really clever, and the EU is going to have to come back with something else because, you know, the initial idea is just an opening salvo and it's not legal, so they have to have more, you know, they have to give them a kind of smorgasbord of different options. The FT Splash tomorrow is already saying that David Cameron's not wedded to that and that he's happy to discuss other ways of reducing net migration. I think it's just a dog whistle, really. I mean, he knows that... Right. He knows that quantitative flows aren't going to be on the table, and he knows that benefits curtailment is illegal.
So you all agree it's not really fundamental. Danny, you're in a kind of a slightly different
I think it's
step away from others.
without it changing the fundamental nature of the EU.
Is there anybody here who thinks David Cameron is in doubt about how he will vote in the referendum?
Well,
Do you think he's in any doubt?
What you can see is the contortions of a man trying to inhabit out and in at the same time. I mean, the way he's talking, the way he says, you know, we don't want closer union, we want further apart.
But is he in
union.
any doubt, or is he
just... No, I think the truth is, I think that he does want to remain inside the European Union. He strongly wants to do that. But I don't think it's certain that he'll be able to achieve what's necessary for him to be able to with conscience, say that. So I don't think it is not absolutely certain that he will take that position.
If there was a vote tomorrow, no change, which way would he vote?
Even though I think it's overwhelmingly likely. And by the way, that's my own position, which is that these negotiations are extremely important to me. They will make a difference to my outlook. On the whole, I think we'd be better off inside the European Union, but I am absolutely not saying if we failed to negotiate, for example, on ever closer union, that I couldn't see myself voting to leave.
I think that I think that Mr Cameron has made himself a real problem. He clearly went in for this whole referendum lark, renegotiation lark, to buy off the troublesome elements in his party. He didn't want to be the Prime Minister who was held hostage by his Eurosceptics, but he's kind of taken himself hostage because he can't get out of, you know, the bag with the locked seal and Velcro fastened that he's put himself in.
The renegotiation is a success, and I'm going to vote in, he says.
Nobody will believe him. Nobody
No,
will believe him because it's falling apart as we speak.
He's the leader of a broad swathe of the right, on large parts of which are extremely sceptical about membership of the European Union. It's perfectly ethical and correct for him to take the position that he's taking, which is to try to get a position the whole of the right can have some sort of negotiation over and present people with the referendum they wanted.
But what he's effectively doing is destroying the in case by presenting it so weakly and so in such a compromised way. I mean, he clearly, if you look at the in case as it stands at the moment, it's all safer, stronger, more prosperous. All it can talk about is it's very like the Scottish referendum, actually. Don't do anything to rock the boat. The status quo is the way forward. And that is not going to be convincing.
But you see, you talk about Harold Wilson stroke E. Heath. I mean, I think Mr. Cameron is relying on, you know, the tried and tested weapon of sheer naked fear and terror. If we come out, it will be catastrophic.
By the way, he might be right.
That would be a lie as well.
To start off with, that may be correct.
I know,
and
but
secondly, it is also quite pertinent. I mean, you know, if it does turn out to be the case that it's extremely risky, I would hope the Prime Minister might point that out.
But the outs are presenting a very kind of dreamlike vision, either of a nostalgic England or a kind of free, muscular, entrepreneurial England without the EU. The ins have to have some dreams of their own.
In the Scottish
we'll have plenty of time.
Win, by the way.
We'll have plenty of time to be debating this. Don't worry, at least another year. Thanks all very much indeed.